Welcome to Rising Stronger Radio, where we explore mental health from a more holistic perspective to empower you to break free from symptoms like anxiety, depression, fatigue, lack of motivation, and addictive behaviors, and instead create an environment both inside and out that is more conducive to healing, vitality, and living a purposeful life. We focus on topics like the power of nutrition, movement, and other lifestyle habits, how to navigate the toxicity and pitfalls of the modern world, as well as philosophical, spiritual, and religious concepts to help you bring out the best in yourself and find your place and purpose in creation. My name is Keith. I'm a holistic health coach and independent mental health researcher. I'm also someone who has faced significant struggles with anxiety, depression, addiction, and other chronic health issues. If you haven't already, you can head over to my website, risingstronger.com, and download my free high mileage foods for mental health guide. I also offer a free 30-minute breakthrough chat if you're interested in personalized guidance in dialing in your nutrition and lifestyle habits to support energy, clarity, and happiness. With that said, let's get into today's episode. Okay, so today we are here with Father Hans, who is an Antiochian Orthodox priest. And what is the name of your church in St. Petersburg?
St. Peter the Apostle.
St. Peter the Apostle.
In Fort Myers, Florida.
Fort Myers, yeah. I always say St. Petersburg. So Father Hans and I had a few conversations privately, and, I was very impressed and interested with his knowledge and understanding of kind of the crisis that modern men face and an understanding in a more complete way of health and mental health. So I invited him on to the podcast to share this in a way that we can make public. So could we start, Father Hans, with you just developing for us how you became a Christian, how you became an Orthodox Christian, and how you became a priest, and anything within that might be relevant for us to know?
Yeah. I kind of raised nominally Christian. There was some in my background. And then when I was really about starting senior year of high school and the year after that, a profound crisis of meaning, and came to see that if there was no God, there was no meaning. And that really, really affected me deeply. And so I kind of started a private search back to God. And then I became evangelical for a while, and which I needed because I was at a time in my life where I just didn't have much structure, right? Mm-hmm. And it provided a structure and a way to live, at least some order, right? I mean, it wasn't chaotic. It was never, it kind of was, but I mean, not like, drug addict or anything like that, but it was there, but it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. And my first time in college was a crash and burn. I quit. I didn't know what I was doing there anyway. So I just worked, and I worked hard. I worked really hard, learned how to work. And then it was time to go back to college. And by that time, I had kind of transitioned out of the evangelical thing, quite frankly, because it just wasn't deep enough, right? It gave me a structure. It gave me a real necessary structure. I needed that. But it just wasn't deep enough. And I went on a search again, and I remember walking out of a classroom once, and I knew I had to make a decision. It was either leave Christ or start over. And I wasn't going to leave Christ because I already, in my previous searching, I'd already tasted hell, and I didn't want it. I just didn't want it. I didn't want the chaos. I could see it disordering. I could see it going into nihilism. Never really an ideologue, right? So I just saw it as just soul splintering. My soul looked like a Picasso painting. Everything was disjointed and fragmented, right? And I just did not want to go back. I was not going to go back there. So I decided I had to start over. I had to start completely over. And then about a week later, I was kind of trolling through the school library, and at the University of Minnesota is where I went to school. And I came across Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Harvard address that he gave at Harvard in 1976. And I read it. I picked it up and read it. And I was just astonished at the depth, the spiritual depth of it, because I've always been interested in culture and history and all that stuff. Even when I was a kid, I was interested in that. And this is the first time I saw a penetration into like the nature of society and reality. You could call
Mm,
it that, right? With such spiritual clarity. It just rang true to me. And I thought, what well is this man drawing from?
mm,
Because it really resonated with me about, things that he said. We could go into detail about it, but primarily looking back at it, at the time, it was a great discovery. I didn't have the language for it, but looking back at it, it was just basically kind of the materialist assault against the
mm,
human soul and its effect on the human person and culture generally. That's what I saw, and I started looking into it a lot more deeply. Discovered orthodoxy through that,
mm,
and but it's a big discovery for me. I saw this is the way I got to go, and then about 9, 10 months later, I met this girl. I was telling her about my great discovery, and she goes, "Well, I'm Orthodox." And I was just
wow.
astounded. I said, "There's Orthodox churches in America? I thought they were only in Russia."
Mm,
She goes, "Yeah." And she was a grad student at the time in American history. And I ended up marrying her. We ended up getting married. This was over 30 years ago.
wow.
Okay. And she was a good grad student, didn't go to church much, but she started going back to church. I started going to church with her. And we got married. And so at that time, too, I would, it took I've been burned a couple of times, and once burned, twice shy. It took me a while to convert. It really did, because I had to deconstruct a lot of my own assumptions.
Mm,
And I remember the first time walking into her church, and there was the icon of the Theotokos there, right? The platitera behind the altar, and I was offended by that. I was offended. But the thought came to me, probably for the first time in my life, well, maybe the problem isn't the churches. Maybe the problem is yours,
mm,
right? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to give this some time. I'm going to give this some time. It took me 3 years to convert, but I did. And then ended up working for the church. We were asked to start a youth program, my wife and I, and we did. And it became very successful. And then, in church work, if you volunteer, there's always more work to do and
mm,
that kind of thing. And we actually got hired on to do that. And um, one day, after about 3 or 4 years, a priest, I'd finished school at this time, and I was also working on I did a master's in Western church history, which is,
mm,
I think, one of the best things I've ever done, because I really understand it and all that. And the priest said, "Well, have you ever thought about becoming a priest?" And actually, I had, and being up close and personal, it felt right. The work I was doing felt right, and I said, "Yes, I have." And so the road to priesthood began, and here we are, 30 years later.
wow. Yeah, and I can tell by the work you're doing now that it was the right path for you, obviously.
It's a fit. It really is a fit. I've learned a lot subsequently, and um, but now I'm doing this work with men, which started about 10 years ago. It's actually was, you know, dispersed here and there, but there's some circumstances in my life, and my situation just radically changed. But in that change, this is what grew out of it.
Mm,
And and for a while there, I mean, I like I said, I was always interested in culture and history and this and that. So for a while there, I was a culture warrior,
mm,
and I mean, a pretty good one too, and in terms of that world, and and I began to see that it wasn't hitting it. I'm good at explaining things. I still am. I like doing it. I like writing essays and stuff like that. But it wasn't changing anything. It just wasn't. And then circumstances were such, and I think it was the hand of the Lord. I mean, really, they were really, I mean, foundation shaking experiences, right?
mm,
And compelled me into kind of a change, and one of them, it brought me to a point where Lord, thy will be done, that type of thing.
Mm.
It was pretty brutal, actually. But I did pray. I said, Lord, what do I do? What do you want me to do? And it came to me in the prayer, open your eyes. Just open your eyes. And I started, instead of fighting the cultural decline politically, I began to realize more deeply the spiritual crisis. And then young men just started coming into my life. And I learned from them, and then Touchstone, the Touchstone magazine, the guys there kind of heard what I was doing, and they asked me to speak at one of their conferences, and I did. And they posted the video of that talk on their website, and it started doing a slow viral. And I started getting these calls from young men from all over the country.
Wow.
And it just started building up. And then at that point, I realized that how powerful what I was saying really was. I didn't have any idea. And I would ask them, I said, well, what compelled you to call me? And they said, well, it was a lot with, problems with pornography and all that, which is just a horrible cancer in our culture. And they said, and these were guys who are struggling with it, and trying to get out of it, but couldn't find their way out of it. And my approach was that it's really misdirected desire. It's very orthodox, and I got it from St. Maximus the Confessor. I think it was a divine intervention, frankly, where I saw this and understood and started working with it that way. And they all said to a man, they said, what you said about being misplaced creativity. Their problems with their pornography. There's something really radically misplaced there, and that needs to be healed. And so that's how that all started, and out of that grew the brotherhood, that St. Paisios brotherhood that we're actually building out. And so here we are. I've learned a lot about the way, just along the way, just dealing with people. I'm not an academic. I mean, I don't find my answers in books. I find my answers in real experience. And then, what happens is I come up against a problem. The problem needs a solution. Then I go looking for the answer. And I go to the fathers a lot. Okay, just listen and pray and stuff like that. And if you want to put a 30,000-foot view on this all, it's that we got to go back to the anthropology of the fathers, because they really understand what the human being is, especially male and female. They understand that. And if you apply the things that they teach, you actually witness the healing of the human person. You witness the healing. You can foster the healing. And that kind of stuff really floats my boat.
Yeah.
So that's the short answer.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. You mentioned a few minutes ago. Oh yeah,
screen this camera out. There we go. I don't know. It kind of moved over. There we go.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about nihilism and how when you were coming across Solzhenitsyn, you saw more of that. How might you point out to someone who maybe isn't, who may be listening to this and isn't aware that maybe they're living in a nihilistic framework of the world, and that's how they're seeing things, and as a result, that's what their life, is and is becoming?
Well, most guys are not, and I see this with men coming into the Orthodox Church. We're witnessing something remarkable. We're seeing all these young men coming to the church. I'm talking about thousands. I could see this coming about 5 years ago, and I would tell my brother priest that. I said, get ready, guys are going to move in. They're going to come in. And they started coming in. And they looked at me. I was at a deanery meeting, a meeting of all the priests, and they started to report that young men were entering the church, and they looked at me and they said, you told us this was going to happen. And they were joking. They said, "You're a prophet. You're a prophet." I said, "No, I'm not a prophet. I just understand which way the culture is moving, and I do.
Yeah.
I really do." And so, what I see with the guys coming into the church, because I talk to a lot of them when they call me up, they come in out of soul pain.
Mm.
Okay, they come in out of soul pain. They come in searching after a whole lot of pain, messed up relationships, not knowing what they should do with their life, all that stuff. And it's because they've been raised in a materialist slash
Mm.
nihilist culture. You know, when you wake up to the world, when you come of age, starts with boys like 13, 14 years old, and then really 15, 16, 17. You believe that what you wake up to, the culture you wake up to, you're coming of age. Okay, this is what the world is like. You believe that that's the way it's always been.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
only when you're older do you realize no, culture goes through, it has waves, right? It has cycles. And you don't know that when you're a teen. I didn't know that. I thought that the way it is now is the way it always was.
Mm.
And so you just accept it. You just accept it and you kind of try and find your place in it, but it's not stable. And so consequently, what happens is you get hurt by it. You get
Mm.
hurt by it. So I think what happens is that you really can't persuade a person that they live in a nihilistic world or that nihilism is the fundamental philosophy governing things, cultural philosophy, until they start making sense of, they try and make sense of their pain. Because nihilism is very, very harmful to the soul. And
Yeah.
what is nihilism? Nihilism nihilism is, well, philosophically, it's kind of the exaltation of death. But what it is existentially, what people experience is the the soul crushing assertion that life has no meaning.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, people cannot abide that, especially young men. I mean, it's what I experienced when I was younger. I experienced it early. I was a little ahead of my time and all that, but I experienced it earlier, so I do really understand it. And only then, when they try to make reason of their pain and the confusion of their life and why things don't seem to work, and when a man sets out to try and comprehend that and even to change it, at that point you can talk about um, some things that are fundamentally wrong in the culture because he's ready to receive it.
Mm.
Before that, he's either kind of captivated by the glitter or, inebriated by the sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
So it sounds like my question was kind of how would somebody recognize that they're living, in a nihilistic framework? Your response was you don't think men, or let's just state it as a fact, men aren't that way. They aren't nihilistic. But on the other hand, you do agree, or you would say that a lot of men are unknowingly just in a culture, in a worldview that is nihilistic, and maybe
Correct.
don't know until, well, you said until they get older, but it could even potentially be longer for some, but don't realize that that isn't necessarily like just the truth or how things are.
Well, they know, but not in an intellectual way
Mm-hmm.
yet. But they know in their soul because they're
Sure.
they're carrying this anguish and this weight with them. And eventually, that anguish and that weight will bring you to your knees.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that. And like you said, I mean, I'm 33 and I can see that my journey, which I've kind of elaborated a little bit to you, is not very unique. Like just leaving Christianity, exploring other things, searching for meaning everywhere, and winding up back
Mm-hmm.
In particular with Orthodoxy. I see a lot of, even at the church we've been going to, like there's far more young men than I anticipated would be there in just very, very similar situations,
Mm-hmm.
circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You also mentioned, and I think this is relevant, but when you were talking about the evangelical and your experience there, it not being deep enough, I think
Mm-hmm.
those were the words that you used. How would you, in maybe an elevator pitch to somebody who might not understand the difference between orthodoxy and some Protestant branch, whether evangelical or otherwise, like how orthodoxy might be deeper and what you meant by that?
I'm going to quote Jordan Peterson here
Okay.
because he said it most succinctly, I think. Okay. And I'll paraphrase him here, but it's a very short clip, but I've watched it like 10 or 20 times. But he goes, I don't know why, but the Orthodox seem to like me. I don't know why, but I think I know why. That's the way he talks, right? And he says, I'm not knocking Protestantism or Catholicism. He says they've got their thing, and I'm going to add, there's good people there. There are. I
Mm,
know them. Okay. He says, but I think this is the difference. Where Protestantism and Catholicism, they kind of ask you to buy in their cognitive system first. Whereas Orthodoxy, as far as I understand it, I'm quoting him, and I agree with this 100%. He says, all they really seem to say is pick up your cross and walk up the damn hill.
mm,
And that's what I think. I think it's true. Okay. Orthodoxy, Orthodoxy is it's very pragmatic. Okay. Life is broken. We're broken. What do we need to do to fix it?
mm,
And the fixing is done by Christ. But it only happens when a man picks up his cross. Okay.
mm,
In other words, there's a lot of ways to say this, but you have to acknowledge you're broken. You have to acknowledge that that we need help. And what we need help is we got to touch the touchstone. I'm quoting Solzhenitsyn there, the touchstone. And that touchstone has to be the transcendent touchstone, it has to be a rock. That rock is Christ. But it's not believing that affects the healing, although he's the healer. All right. It's living your life properly.
mm.
That's what happens. You were not going to change until you decide, okay, I got to change this, and I got to do what's necessary to change this. And and this is what I love about orthodoxy because it's congruent with reality. It's
Mm,
really what it is. Actually, what it does, it explains reality. It there's a congruency between the structure of our soul and the structure of creation, reality, right? And those two have to mesh. Those two have to mesh. If there's disorder in your soul, there's going to be disorder in your life. If there's disorder in your life, there's going to be disorder in your soul.
mm,
Okay, so how do we straighten this out? What is the path? It's very pragmatic. It's very day by day. It's the emphasis and the focus is on how you live, and at the center of that is a cross. So, what is my cross, and how do I carry it? And it's in the doing, it's in the carrying, it's in the action, right? That the changes happen. Now, and that stands in direct contradiction to a very modernist superstition.
mm,
Okay, that's what I call it, and that superstition is this: we think that if we can figure out the dynamics of something, we will be released and healed. That's not true. It's not true. Actually, what you do is you start moving forward in the proper way to the best way that you know it, right? And you will find freedom that way.
mm,
And that's what I like. I mean, I'm not therapy has its place, and I know some really good therapists, but understanding a problem and actually solving it are two different things, are two
mm.
different dynamics. The understanding won't bring the healing necessarily. And that's what people believe. So they think and they think and they think and they think, right? And they might understand their problems 5 levels deep. Quite impressive. But they're still stuck in the problem.
Hmm.
It's
So that,
doing and it's action.
yeah. So that actually segues really well into something that I want to ask you. You mentioned therapists, and I agree there are good therapists, and as we've talked about a little bit, it's not that I don't think that there's a place at times, but I think a lot of times it's misguided in how we see those things. But if you were to take an assessment from your experience and your understanding of things, what way would you say that modern psychology and let me snooze that modern psychology and like the mental health industry missed the mark?
Um, um, listen, I think that a lot of you say mental health industry, and I kind of agree with that. Okay, I think it's kind of a new Gnosticism in some sense.
Hmm.
They say
Oh,
they
that's
say
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting to
it,
think about.
yeah, it's a new Gnosticism. It's this belief that if you analyze deeply enough, that you'll somehow unlock the key to the malady. Okay. Um, I see, how can I say this? I'm trying not to, my patron saint is John the Baptist. And whenever I talk, I want to make sure I don't say something that's going to get my head cut off. so, so, um, I see it as kind of a new Gnosticism. I see it as there's way too much emphasis on the therapy part, and we need a lot more emphasis on the doing part.
Hmm.
Okay. And I'm not afraid to say to someone, this is what you need to do. Do this, 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 and this. If they do it. And a lot of guys do actually, because guys want to know what to do. They don't want to necessarily, they don't get to the point they want to go, they get to by thinking about it. The only thing they want to think about is what do I need to do? And
Hmm.
sometimes you give guys directions, do this, 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 and this, right? Just give them direction. You only give the direction. You only show them the next step because you've shown the steps after that. You talk about that, they get confused.
Hmm.
They need to experience.
Yeah.
And it's in that experience at that point, this is the way I operate. At that point, you can contextualize that experience, and that's where the knowledge is really valuable because they experience something regenerative, okay, something healing, something that brings order into their life. And at that point, they experience that. At that point, you can add context, conceptual context to that experience. So it's whole at that point.
Hmm.
WHOLE, and it becomes part of them. And they move on and they get stronger. That's the way I operate. I don't think that by understanding the concepts and the theories in an intellectual way that will affect the change. So I'm kind of an existentialist in kind of the Camus sense, right? That a man posits himself through action,
Hmm.
and I think that's really true. I think that the action is very important. That
Hmm.
this is what you got to do it, and that will foster the regenerative healing experience for him.
So would you even say that in in some ways when you shift from a nihilistic view of things, like a meaningless view of existence, to one of meaning, that then you can extract from it that we have built into us this healing capacity that doesn't require all this analyzing, doesn't I mean, again, maybe there's a place where maybe it's necessary sometimes, but that where the modern world takes more of a secular approach to health and mental health, when
Mm-hmm.
you see it from this way, it's just understanding that it's already in there. It's already a part of what we're capable of doing if we have the right, the right guidance and the right set of eyes, let's say.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm.
So by analogy, if I cut my arm, okay, I have a cut on my arm, I have a gash on my arm. What's my job? My job is to clean out the wound.
Mm.
Okay, my job is to bandage them, but it's the body that heals. The body has a natural propensity towards healing. I submit, so does the soul. So does the soul.
Mm.
And 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 I think that this healing dynamic, this healing regenerative dynamic, is it floods all of creation. Look, everything is geared towards
Mm.
life. It's geared towards life. You know, in the spring, the buds come out on the trees, right? The buds come out. It's really quite remarkable. Sometimes those buds produce fruit. There's things are geared towards abundance. Okay. And 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 the energies in the creation are geared towards abundance. So we see that in the material world, but the unseen, the non-material world, we can call it the spiritual, although I have trouble saying that because of that's just a language deal. But the
Mm.
things we don't see, but are as necessary to the flourishing of human life as the things that we do see, they have that same dynamic of flourishing. They have
Mm.
that same dynamic of healing. And and everything points towards, well, ultimately the kingdom. Now there's suffering in this world because the world is broken. It's a big theological thing, right? But the fundamental dynamic is towards healing and wholeness, even in the brokenness, even in the suffering. So yes, I think that the soul has a natural propensity for healing, just like the body has a natural propensity for healing. Absolutely.
Mm. And would you say I've forget where I heard this, but I only heard it in one place, and I've been curious if this is more like an accepted view of this kind of thing. But the concept was that the things that happen in our lives that seem like they're like God's absent, maybe they're painful, they're tragic, however you want to word it, that these things are allowed and they're part of how God helps us because they're necessary to give us the opportunity to overcome and to grow and to come back to God, to come closer to God. Do you see things that way?
Um, kind of, sort of. Okay. I'm very, very cautious of kind of like grand overarching themes that try and make sense of the suffering in the world. Okay. So, um, I mean, real tragedies do happen.
Sure.
Real tragedy. I mean, children die, people get divorced, right? We had the hurricane come through, and people I know lost their homes.
Yeah.
These are real serious things. Um, so rather than trying to, this is the way I operate, rather than trying to kind of like provide a comfort and meaning through kind of a grand unified philosophical theory that I can use as an overlay. Um, and I'm not diminishing the need for that and the need to understand these things at all. But
Hmm.
I don't find them in the crux of the problem. I don't find it helpful. There's only one thing I find helpful, and it's this. This is a horrible situation. Where do we find Christ in
Hmm.
it? And that's the way I that's the way I approach it. It's kind of a raw existential look. Okay, this is a horrible situation. Yeah, we could say that God is in control, and he is, but that's not very helpful in dealing with the mess on the ground. Okay, so where are you, Lord? Where are you? And and he's he's so it he's at the center of that tragedy. It's where he is because that tragedy itself is a cross. It's a suffering.
Hmm.
So that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I try and approach it. Sometimes it's real difficult to do because you got to kind of step into the situation with the person.
Mm.
But you do, and you don't have answers. You don't have answers, right? There's no if someone is dying, if someone is dying, and it's not a natural death, like a death at the end of life, something that we know happens, but it's a catastrophic, call it an unnatural death. Like I've had those, you know. Once I had to deal with a person who was murdered, a young
Mm.
girl who was murdered. Right? How do you make sense of this? Right? Let me clarify that. That's not even the question, is what do you do with the mother
Mm.
who is undergoing this tremendous shock and tremendous anguish, right? So the ultimate real question is, where do we find Christ in this? Not in a theoretical way, but in a real existential, experiential way, which means, dealing with the grief and all the brokenness, all the sorrow that surrounds the brokenness.
Mm.
But if you approach it that way, you also find answers, and you see more deeply how the creation really works, even in its brokenness, and this propensity towards healing is still there,
Mm.
even though things are broken. And the ultimate reconciliation can only be Christ, because the fragmentation, the raw anguish of having to deal with that brokenness on its own terms, and there's no escape from it because it's there. It does point to Christ and his consolation in the end. I forgot what the question was because
No, well, don't. I think what you did was take something that it could have even been my own misunderstanding, but something that didn't really fit well for reasons that you just defined, and pulled it together in a way that does make a lot of sense. So
oh,
don't
okay,
worry about
all
the
right.
question. You answered it really well. I think this might be obvious in some ways, but maybe not always, to people who are like men who are lost. But what what would you say? You said one thing, and it correlates a lot with the question I was going to ask you, but like, what might somebody look at in their lives or in their life to recognize brokenness? And the reason that I'm asking you that is because I think for a lot of people, so much of what is broken is so normal that we don't even realize that we're walking around and everything or a lot of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis is broken, but it's so common that we don't realize that it's not normal.
Yeah, I would say if there's one indicator, really strong indicator, and I think that contributes to the perpetuation of the brokenness, it's loneliness.
Mm.
I think one of the greatest crises in modern culture is that men don't have communion with other men.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons why I started the Brotherhood, was to foster that. I think men are incredibly lonely for fellowship and communion and the love of other men. And there's something behind that too. And it's this, is that men learn how to become a man from other men, not from
Mm.
women, and certainly not from the culture. Okay, they learn it through personal communion, real love, a bond between them and other men, brotherhood. I think it's so absolutely necessary for a man to become existentially grounded, psychologically, emotionally. I think men who have good relationships with other men make better husbands.
Mm.
Okay, and it's under assault in our society. Men are just painfully lonely. They really desire that communion, and 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 I think a lot of the despair that men feel is because that's what they really desire, but they cannot find.
Mm. So how about, even when you say loneliness, that
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of sense. Like, I could see that that would be at the core of a lot of things. What might the symptoms that manifest specifically in somebody's life as a result of loneliness look like, that somebody might, maybe they don't think about, for lack of a better way to say it, like a less than ideal or degenerate behavior? What might some of the things that people be doing as a result of their loneliness, as a result of their lack of connection with other men, look like? Like, what are some of these specifics that if somebody's listening and they're like, I don't know if I'm lonely, but then you could say, well, if you're doing these things, or if your life looks like this, you might want to take another step back and see that it's coming from this, even if you don't realize it yet.
Well, one thing I've discovered is that men feel real inadequate about their own masculinity. Okay. And so that manifests itself a lot in we're going to call them like aberrant behavior. And I think, and I deal with this a lot, and I don't hide behind euphemisms or anything like that. I think that's a lot of what's the problem with the porn and then ultimately self-abuse issue. Okay, I deal with that a lot. I've discovered that when, men's sense of inadequacy, and a lot of men have deep inadequacies. Okay, they tend to think that it's a psychotherapeutic deficiency, and they're kind of ashamed of it, right? I don't think it's that at all. I think the inadequacies arrive when they don't have enough paternal love growing up,
Mm.
and it's I'm pointing out another big problem I see. It's a crisis in fatherhood, but it's all related. When men don't know the love of their fathers, okay, and a lot of men don't. They grow up without it. It's what happens is a father's love, paternal love, is like water to the soul, and it provides the safety for the boy to grow into a man.
Mm.
And what happens is that if that's not there, that safety isn't there, and neither is that nourishment, that watering of paternal love, of a father's love. And so the boy grows up into a man feeling inadequate because he didn't have the opportunity to test himself and to become strong and to grow in self-knowledge and figure out what his interests are and abilities and skills and all those things that are necessary for sound manhood, right? And so he grows up and he feels the inadequacy, believes he has a deficit, right? And so what he does is he creates what I call a false self. He projects a false self, which is actually the inverse of the inadequacy,
Mm.
hoping that that will bring him healing. That'll bring him into a fuller sense of his own manhood. But it doesn't. In fact, it's a kind of pride in a way. It's a kind of pride. There's different kinds of pride, but this is a kind of pride that in the end blocks off the possibility for for developing into a stronger sense of his own manhood. Okay, because he requires, what he's doing is he's his peers, his friends, right? He's projecting this forward because he really needs it affirmed, but it kind of gets blocked off, and this is, I think, brings a lot of anguish into a guy's life because we all need paternal love. We all need a father. Now, here's something beautiful I've discovered too, that if this brotherhood is fostered and the relationships between men are honest and and full of integrity, that brother can help brother. All right. And when a brother helps brother, the love he's really giving to his brother is the love of a father. It's
Mm.
paternal, it's masculine. And so brother helping brother is a way that a man who did not have the measure of paternal fatherly love that he needed, and I mean, like I say, it's a social crisis. It's a big problem that I'm describing that can actually be met by a brother. So, the brother is actually fathering the brother.
Mm.
So if you help your brother, you really help him. And you do this out of real feeling for him. You love him, right? you're actually fathering your brother. And when your brother helps you, you're being fathered by the help of your brother, because all brotherly love is fundamentally paternal. It's masculine.
Mm.
And that's what fosters the healing. That's where the growth into self-confidence, into self-awareness, all those things necessary for stable and sound manhood can occur. All right. So you ask, okay, how can a person recognize that they're kind of in a nihilistic frame of mind and that they need to do something? It's when the attempts to self-heal don't work.
Mm.
And again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is sometimes the pain is so deep it brings us to our knees. But coming to our knees is what shatters the myth of the false self and renders you open to receive the authentic love of other men, which is always, because it comes from men, paternal in character. It always is to make the man a stronger man. Makes sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Would you say that that inverse uh
False self.
result was that?
The inverse, the false self.
Yeah,
I
would you
interrupted
say
you, sorry.
that where that comes from is largely unconscious to most people, that they don't realize that they have this sense of, like, they probably could identify with that, but they're not necessarily walking around on a day-to-day basis thinking like I'm deficient or I'm lacking. It's more energy going into like creating this false sense of pride and, you know, image, which I mean I can like look at and relate to. I don't think it's uncommon, but my question is it, would you say that it's something that a lot of people don't realize or think about necessarily that they're doing?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is kind of reflexive, actually, and especially in a world where we confuse real reality with virtual reality.
Mm.
Okay, because the virtual reality now becomes part of our reality. We really think it's real. Okay,
Mm.
and so part of this is, the advent of development of technology and the capability to present yourself in a detached way.
Yeah. Yeah. So what might, like, if somebody weren't aware of this, you know, maybe hearing it, they're like, on the, maybe is that how I am? Is that what I'm doing here? What, how might you invite somebody to go into that, to see it, to accept it, to, you know, maybe like nurture that may be the truth, and then move forward from there in some of the ways that you're saying, brotherhood and you know, finding that somewhere. But how might you invite somebody to accept and kind of internalize something that might be uncomfortable or like a blow to that false self?
Um, well, this is something that's relinquished person by person. When a person comes to see that, I'm not being nourished here. I'm not being nourished here. It's anguish. It's really, we're brought to anguish that, we can act, we can pretend, we got a lot of energy, we can kind of keep the facade going, right? And I don't mean that cynically, because what the reason for that is that there's a woundedness that's being protected.
Mm.
And sometimes what drives that false self is the fear of being wounded again if you drop the barriers. Men are real, they've been attacked a lot. They've been attacked a lot and they're wounded.
Mm.
And they see the world as kind of a hostile place, especially against manhood, because the culture is hostile towards manhood.
Mm.
Is, right? So a person will hear what I'm saying if he just can't bear the woundedness anymore and knows that he needs healing, at which point he starts opening up.
Mm.
And what I've noticed on the Brotherhood, especially the Telegram chat, we got 6 of them, 100 guys there now or something like that, right? And they talk all the time. It's real interesting reading it all, right? That once he hears other men talking in this way, he goes, "Oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not a freak. This is a problem that a lot of guys deal with. Yes, yes, our culture is really sick in this way,
Mm.
right? Yes, we have to create the enclaves where we can find our healing and grow into our own manhood. And so, um, we can talk about this, but somebody could be listening to this podcast, for example. If they're not ready to hear it, they're not going to hear it,
Right.
right? But if a man is in touch with himself to the point where he says, I got to figure out something because it's not working, they're going to hear this. They're going to hear this and it's going to resonate in their soul. And whenever something resonates in a man's soul, he kind of comes to attention because that resonance is an affirmation that maybe this is true, right? And then he starts
Yeah.
the path of self-discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful.
It's
It is
great
what,
stuff.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you think that there's a reason that you can put your hand on as to why, like, it seems like it's happening a lot, let's say specifically for men, but even for women, just kind of coming around to seeing what the modern world is and how, inconducive to like life it is, let's say. But do you think that the reason why, as opposed to maybe 50 years ago, where it was all kind of like a lowercase s stoicism, just bury it all, don't talk about it, kind of remain in this hardened way of being for men? Do you think there's a reason why now specifically it seems like that just isn't the thing anymore? Like, did we hit a pinnacle of just can't take it anymore? It's like killing men to be that way, or to ignore what's happening. I don't know if that question makes sense, but
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think about it, right? And I'm trying to locate what really happened. If we can locate what really happened, we can figure out why we're in the situation we are now. Um, I have a theory. It's just a theory. But when did the cultural fragmentation really start? It started about in the 60s.
mm,
Now the antecedents for that were located much, much earlier. But somehow the culture held together until the 60s, about the mid 60s, right? And we're kind of the wholesale rejection of the established order began. Now, is the established order completely corrupt? No, it's not. It's not.
mm,
Okay. But faith in the order, faith in the institutions, started to erode. Now, why was that? Why the 60s? Well, it was only 20 years after the end, or what was it? About Yeah, it was 20 years, 25 years after the end of World War II. Okay, so these are really they're the boomers, right? They're the children of the World War II guys, which they called the greatest generation now. Okay, so what happened here? Could it have been that these guys came back so traumatized from the war? It was a
mm,
world war, right? That and they came back so traumatized from the war, but that trauma was never really dealt with.
mm,
And there was still enough faith in the institutions that you had just adopted that and then conformed your life to it.
mm,
And 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 then of course they grew up, the boomers grew up, they had kids of their own. But then you really see the fatherless problem increasing. The divorce rate skyrocket,
mm,
this and that. I mean, we're kind of in a national crisis, right? Until we reach the present generation. And guys, your age have, a lot of you have grown up fatherless
mm,
and either had no father or had a father who was so full of his own trauma, he didn't know how to father, right? So, I mean, that's a very general theory. It's very general, but I look at it I look at it and I can see a progressive decline in fatherhood. And when you have a progressive decline in fatherhood, you have it's because the boys, when they became men and became fathers, didn't know how to father. And it gets progressively worse, worse, and worse until guys your age, Keith, and your generation, you're kind of left with the outflow of this.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. And
Yeah.
and at the same time, you've got a culture that's gone really quite decadent. All right. And you've been marketed to and manipulated from the day you were born. I saw that when my daughter was growing up, right? And she goes, when she asked me, Dad, could I have a quarter to buy some gum at a machine in the grocery store? I said, yeah, sure. I gave her a quarter. And she comes back. She's like 4 or 5 years old. She goes, Daddy, Britney Spears is on the machine. And I was horrified. I
Yeah.
went, man, they're just targeting her. They're targeting her right
Yeah.
everywhere. And something has fundamentally collapsed. And what am I doing with the brotherhood? I'm combating that in a creative way. I
Yeah.
stand against the culture in that.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, one of the main things I wanted to ask you about, which I'm thinking now, if you'd be willing at some point to do a part two to this conversation, I think it could, an entire conversation could be dedicated to kind of men seeing and understanding and developing what you're saying about like the traumas that we have. I think for a lot of people, it's not necessarily recognized, but it dictates the way that we live in a lot of ways, or that a lot of people live. But for time's sake, I think I'm gonna pause that for today.
Okay.
I have 3 questions, kind of like a rapid fire thing that I was hoping to ask you as kind of a closing, and then we can wrap up. And everything you said, I mean, I'm positive that anybody who listens to this will get a lot out of it. I'm already excited to just go back and re-listen myself. It's been very interesting and wisdom filled, so I appreciate it. For kind of a rapid fire, what is your, I don't want to say favorite, but what is a passage in the Bible, if that'd be the right way to say it, that really you gravitate toward and brings you, strength, comfort, whatever that might be, that you would want to share with people?
Yeah. I've got 2.
Okay.
The first one is the promise, I will never leave you or forsake you. I tell guys that a lot, and I remind myself a lot. That's the Lord speaking. I will never leave you or forsake you.
And is that in the Psalms, or is that a?
I don't remember where. I
Okay,
just
we
say
can
it all
find
the
it.
time. Yeah, we'll find
Okay.
it.
Okay.
And the other one is Ephesians. Paul in Ephesians. This is my favorite scripture. I think it's Ephesians 4 something. I always forget where they're located. Okay. I pray that you come to visions and revelations of the knowledge of him, Christ, unto mature man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. That's my favorite. I'll say it again. I pray that you come to visions and revelations of the knowledge of him, unto mature manhood, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. No one desires our growth into full and stable manhood more than our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. No one. Okay. And it comes through knowledge, the knowledge of him. That's the foundation of my healing praxis, which we're going to talk about some other time.
Yeah, that's powerful. Second of 3, what is the best piece of advice, or a piece of advice that meant a lot to you that you might share?
There's two. One is in the struggle to overcome pornography and self-abuse. It's you are misplacing your male creativity. Okay, it's misplaced creativity. And what we got to do is we got to purify the desire, because the fulfillment you're looking for in the sin, you will receive by being creative and doing what God created you to do.
Mm,
It's misdirected desire.
yeah, that
That's
makes sense.
that's number one. And number two is the most exciting journey a man can undergo is the journey of self-discovery,
Mm,
discovering who he is and what he was created to do. Because all of us have that, not only that desire, but all of us have that calling. And a big part of life is defining that calling and actualizing it.
yeah,
It's good
that's the big
stuff,
one.
isn't it?
It's great stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Last question. Would there be, you can do one, three, five, whatever comes to mind, but books that you would recommend men read?
Well, the first one, of course, is Holy Scripture. Um, oh man, I recommend a lot of books. The Elder, the Guru, and the Young Man. If you want to really see what real how powerful Christ can be, and
Mm,
what spiritual fatherhood really is, I love that book.
The Elder, the Guru, and the Young Man.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that sounds
Um,
good.
a history book. I've not read this for a long time, but one that really shaped me was Modern Times by Paul Johnson. The world from the 20s to it's been updated 20s to the 90s. If you want to understand this whole kind of descent into moral relativism from a historical point of view, not a philosophical one, but historical, um, that's really a good book. Um, but it's big. It's like this big. Not many
Mm,
guys read it, but I've read it twice. And
okay.
I read it when I was younger, and it's a really good book. But I like history. I
Yeah.
like history a lot. Um, the other books, um, if you're looking into orthodoxy, I use this in a catechism class I just finished. Small Steps into the Kingdom by Father Spiridon Bailey, which is a great intro
Okay.
to Orthodox Christianity. And then there are I, our thoughts determine our lives. Okay, and that's a really good book because it we tend to think this is important. We tend to think that every thought we have comes from inside of us. It's another modernist superstition.
Mm,
They don't. They don't. There's a lot of activity in the unseen world
yeah.
around us, and
Yeah.
a lot of our thoughts come in from the outside. So, guys, when really bad thoughts enter your mind, sometimes just remember that they're not coming from you. They're coming in from the outside. Just push them away.
Mm. Amazing. Can you let our listeners know where they can find more of your work, and also just give some details quick about the Brotherhood?
Okay, the Brotherhood, Saint St. Paisios Brotherhood.com. All right. And a lot of the stuff that I've written on pornography and stuff is located there. There's a lot of stuff online on YouTube interviews. I don't really catalog those. So just put my name. It's either Father Hans or Johannes.
Okay.
Uh, and just put that in there and you'll find them. I don't really keep track of everything that's out there, but you can reach me through the Brotherhood. Um, the Brotherhood has a Telegram chat. That's for men only, but you might consider joining that because I think you'll get a lot of enlightenment from it. And otherwise, if you find my phone number, and everybody does, it's out there. Text me first, though. Text me first because it's very rare I can just pick up the phone and talk. But if you
Yeah,
text me, we'll set up a time to talk.
I can confirm that that's how we got in touch. I found your phone number. You were very gracious to respond and very quickly get some time scheduled for us to talk. And it's been, our conversations have been fruitful. So I encourage
Yeah,
anybody who hears this and can resonate with what's being said to reach out if they're called to do so.
yeah.
But yeah, Father Hans, thank you so much for your time. This has all been great. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. And yeah, like I said, we can hopefully do a part two and dive deeper into some of these topics.
I would love to. I'm glad to do it, Keith.
Great. Thank you. All right. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and head over to risingstronger.com. You can join my growing email list by entering your email address or downloading my free guide, the High Mileage Foods for Better Mental Health Guide. I do offer a free 30-minute coaching consultation. You can sign up for that there as well. And again, I appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next episode.